The bells of Rome never truly sleep. Even in the deep hours before dawn, when the Tiber moves like black silk through a city of crumbling marble and muttering wind, one can hear them, faint, distant, tolling not for prayer, but for memory. The moon rests pale upon the tiled rooftops of the Vatican, and within its halls ghosts stir. He sold the papacy like a horse, then reclaimed it, then sold it again. Some said he was possessed, others that he was simply spoiled by bloodlines too tangled to produce anything but madness. At 16, he was pope. At 20, he was drenched in scandal. At 30, he vanished into shadow. The church called it providence. Rome called it survival. Whispers in monasteries, defiant scribes, women who refused to be silenced. They saw the rot, they wrote it down. Some were silenced by flame. To understand how power, even draped in gold and sanctified by choirs, can still be fragile, still be human. The popes of the Middle Ages were not all monsters. Some were poets, some were cowards, some were both, but all of them, in the end, faced the same silence, the same death, the same judgment, not from kings or courts or canon, but from the God they claimed to serve. And perhaps in that stillness, they too wept, not for their sins, but for the world that allowed them to happen, others by obscurity. But their echoes linger still, hidden in margins and footnotes, waiting for the restless to find them. Because the story of the popes is not just of holiness and horror, it is also of contradiction, of men who prayed and sinned in the same breath, who kissed the altar with wine on their lips and guilt in their hearts, who feared hell more than they believed in heaven, because power in this era did not move cleanly. It oozed, corrupted, slipped between fingers. Even the papal ring, kissed by kings, had once belonged to a boy who had never spoken a true sermon in his life. Not saints, but men, powerful, fearful, exquisite in sin. One pope fathered a daughter, then blessed her marriage to a duke he despised. Popes who sold indulgences for gold, who waged wars from cathedrals, who silenced reformers with poison rather than scripture. Politics dripped from every chalice. The Avignon papacy, where 7 French popes reigned far from Rome, turned the Vatican into a ghost town. Streets overgrown, statues toppled. The once holy city abandoned like a grave no one dares tend. And in that silence, cardinals schemed like merchants, selling faith in parcels, betting on the next conclave like gamblers in a tavern. Another orchestrated the death of his successor, only to exhume the corpse later and put it on trial. The Synodus Horrenda, they called it, the Cadaver Synod, a grotesque puppet show in God's own house. The corpse, dressed in sacred robes, was accused of perjury. When found guilty, they stripped it, severed the fingers once used for blessing, and flung it into the Tiber. And still they lit the incense, still they sang the hymns. Once crowned in mitres and crimson robes, now forgotten beneath dust and incense. A door creaks where no wind moves. At candle gutters where none were lit, they wept at relics. They walked for weeks to glimpse a thorn from Christ's crown. They filled the pews, clutching rosaries, blind to the rot beneath the marble. Because scandal was not new, it was eternal. It clung to every sacred empire. And the church, like Rome before it, knew how to survive. It burned heretics and canonized sinners. It erased names. It rewrote sins into miracles. It shrouded history in incense until only mystery remained. Because the story of the popes is not only one of salvation, but of scandal, lust robed in Latin, greed disguised in gold. These were shepherds who hunted wolves, but became wolves themselves. These were fathers of Christendom who bedded courtesans by moonlight and wept for forgiveness by sunrise. It begins in the dark heart of the Middle Ages, when cities stank of sweat, piss, and sanctity. The air was heavy with plague smoke and rose water. The church ruled not only heaven, but earth, and the Pope was no mere bishop. He was an emperor in robes. He named kings. He crowned emperors. He commanded crusades with the flick of a jeweled hand. And beneath all this sacred ritual there lived temptation, thick and ripe as figs left too long on the vine. In the Lateran palace, tapestries hung to muffle moans. Behind cathedral walls, whispers passed faster than prayers. There were bribes paid in silk and salt, confessions turned to leverage, monasteries that echoed with more laughter than liturgy. Pope John XII was but a boy when he inherited the throne of St. Peter, a throne meant to guide souls to paradise. But he turned it into a theater of flesh. He drank with thieves, gambled holy relics, and was said to keep a woman in every wing of the Lateran. They called his chambers a brothel, his tongue sacrilegious, his kiss lethal. When he died, they found him with a married woman. Some said struck down by God, others by the husband's fist. The streets of Rome did not weep. They watched and gossiped and turned their prayers to the next, and still the church endured. Then came Benedict IX, not once, but thrice. The corridors of power echoed with sins confessed only in Latin, incest hidden beneath velvet veils, murder dressed in vestments. Yet not all scandal was carnal. There was ambition too, sharp as a dagger's point. And yet, the people still believed. There were voices, of course. Now, in the quiet of sleep, we trace these stories not to scandalize, but to remember.